Between 1940 and 1990, American grandmothers baked 30 casseroles that filled every table, fed families, and stretched expensive ingredients into meals for 8, then let them disappear without passing down the recipes. The first 5 defined an era when casseroles ruled church basements and Sunday dinners. Number 6 won a national prize in 1964. Number 14 uses cabbage in a way that defies logic. Number 20 involves meatballs that look like porcupines. These weren't just casseroles. They were history. Let's begin with the first one. Lima beans and marshmallows in the same dish sounds like a mistake, but in the 1930s, it was deliberate, strategic cooking that turned cheap vegetables into something sweet enough to get children to eat them. Dried lima beans soaked overnight, then simmered until tender. After draining, they went into a casserole dish with brown sugar and butter stirred through until the beans were coated and glossy. Strips of bacon got laid across the top enough to flavor everything underneath without being the main ingredient. The dish baked at 350 degrees for 30 minutes. Then came the marshmallows. A dozen regular marshmallows scattered across the surface went back into the oven for 5 minutes until they puffed up, turned golden, and created a toasted, sticky layer over the beans and bacon. The result tasted like candied beans, sweet, smoky, with the marshmallows adding a textural contrast that made the whole thing feel less like vegetables and more like dessert. Children ate it without complaint. Adults knew it was cheap protein stretched with sugar to make it palatable. Lima beans cost almost nothing. Marshmallows were inexpensive. Together, they fed 8 people for under $1. After the Depression ended, people stopped making it immediately and never spoke of it again. Nobody remembers when Tennessee onions first appeared at Southern potlucks, but by the 1950s, the dish was everywhere. Pounds of sliced Vidalia onions baked under butter and cheese until they turned impossibly sweet and soft. The onions got peeled and sliced into thick rings, then layered in a deep casserole dish. Each layer got sprinkled with salt, pepper, and a blend of shredded Swiss and Parmesan cheese. Melted butter poured over the top before the whole thing went into a 350-degree oven for 45 minutes. The onions cooked down significantly, releasing their moisture and caramelizing at the edges where they touched the sides of the dish. The cheese melted into every layer, creating strings of golden brown goodness on top while staying creamy underneath. Tennessee onions tasted rich and sweet, almost like French onion soup without the broth. The texture was soft and silky, with the cheese adding salt and fat that balanced the natural sweetness of the Vidalia onions. People ate it as a side dish alongside roast beef or fried chicken. A 5-pound bag of onions cost less than $1 in the 1950s. The cheese was the expensive part, but even that was cheaper than meat. After the 1980s, the dish quietly disappeared from most tables. Carrots got elevated to something that looked fancy in the 1960s when home cooks discovered they could whip them into a souffle that rose high and impressed dinner guests without costing much. Carrots got peeled, chopped, and boiled until they were completely soft. After draining, they went into a blender with eggs, sugar, flour, baking powder, and a splash of vanilla extract. The mixture blended until smooth and slightly frothy from the air beaten into the eggs. The batter poured into a buttered casserole dish and baked at 350 degrees for about 40 minutes. As it cooked, the souffle puffed up dramatically, rising above the edge of the dish with a golden brown top that cracked slightly in the center. Carrot casserole souffle tasted mildly sweet, somewhere between a vegetable side and a dessert. The texture was light and airy, almost custard-like, with the carrots providing an orange color and subtle earthiness that kept it from being too sugary. Some families dusted powdered sugar on top before serving. A 2-pound bag of carrots cost 30 cents in the 1960s. Eggs were cheap. Sugar was cheap. The entire dish cost less than $1 and looked expensive enough to serve at holiday dinners. By the 1990s, it had vanished completely.
Many of you have been asking where to find these recipes. We've gathered hundreds of them from the Depression era through the 1970s in our cookbook, Grandma's Kitchen. Complete instructions, pro tips in 10 chapters. Link is in the description below. Now, let's get back to the video.
American cooks in the 1950s loved creating mock versions of ethnic foods, and mock chop suey casserole was their attempt at Chinese food using only ingredients from the supermarket shelf. Ground beef browned in a skillet with chopped onions and celery until everything was cooked through. A can of cream of mushroom soup got stirred in, along with a can of chop suey vegetables, mostly bean sprouts, and water chestnuts packed in liquid. Soy sauce added color and salt. The mixture went into a casserole dish, got topped with crunchy chow mein noodles from a can, and baked at 350 degrees for 30 minutes. The casserole came out hot and bubbly, with the chow mein noodles staying crispy on top, while the bottom stayed creamy and thick from the soup. It tasted vaguely Asian salty from the soy sauce, slightly sweet from the vegetables, with a texture that was soft except for the crunchy noodle topping. Families ate mock chop suey casserole thinking they were having Chinese food. They weren't, but it was cheap and filling and used shelf-stable ingredients that didn't require a trip to a specialty store. A pound of ground beef, 2 cans, and noodles cost about $2 total. After the 1970s, when real Chinese takeout became accessible, mock chop suey disappeared. Turkey divine was the forgotten cousin of chicken divan, a 1970s variation that used leftover Thanksgiving turkey instead of chicken, paired with broccoli and a curry-spiked cream sauce that made the whole thing taste exotic. Cooked turkey got cut into bite-sized pieces and laid in the bottom of a casserole dish. Frozen broccoli florets, thawed but not cooked, went on top of the turkey. The sauce came together in a saucepan: cream of mushroom soup, mayonnaise, a splash of lemon juice, and a generous amount of curry powder whisked until smooth. The sauce poured over the turkey and broccoli, covering everything. Shredded cheddar cheese and breadcrumbs mixed together got sprinkled across the top. The casserole baked at 350 degrees for 35 minutes until the cheese melted and the breadcrumbs turned golden. Turkey divine tasted creamy and slightly spicy from the curry powder, with the lemon juice adding brightness that cut through the richness of the mayonnaise and soup. The broccoli stayed slightly crisp, and the turkey soaked up all the flavors from the sauce. Leftover turkey was free, already paid for at Thanksgiving. The rest of the ingredients cost less than $3. Families made turkey divine in the days after Thanksgiving when everyone was tired of plain turkey sandwiches. By the 1990s, it had faded completely. 5 down, 25 to go. The next 5 include a prize-winning casserole that vanished after 1964, a Depression-era dish made from vegetable scraps and cooking water, the Midwest's most mandatory potluck contribution, a 3-soup chicken recipe nobody makes anymore, and Church Lady's tuna casserole without canned soup. Keep going. This is number 6 from the intro, the casserole that won a national prize in 1964 and then disappeared as if it never existed. Hungry Boy's casserole came from a cooking contest sponsored by a noodle company looking for creative recipes using their product. The winning entry layered cooked egg noodles with browned ground beef, cream cheese, sour cream, canned tomato sauce, and shredded cheddar in a pattern that repeated twice before baking. The noodles cooked first, then got drained and mixed with softened cream cheese while still hot, so the cheese melted into every strand. Ground beef browned with onions and salt went into the bottom of a casserole dish. Half the creamy noodles spread over the beef. The pattern repeated: more noodles, more sour cream, more sauce, more cheese building height and layers. The whole thing baked at 350 degrees for 30 minutes. Hungry Boy's casserole came out rich and heavy, with distinct layers visible when you cut into it. The cream cheese made the noodles impossibly smooth, and the combination of sour cream and tomato sauce created a tangy, savory flavor that balanced the richness. It won first prize, got published in magazines, and then vanished. By 1970, nobody was making it anymore. Depression-era cooks didn't throw away anything, including the water vegetables were cooked in, and this 1935 casserole proved that even cooking liquid could become dinner. Whatever cooked vegetables were left in the icebox went into a casserole dish: green beans, carrots, peas, corn, anything that had been served earlier in the week. The vegetable cooking water got saved and poured over the vegetables until they were almost covered. A can of condensed tomato soup got spooned on top without stirring, creating a thick layer. Stale bread got torn into chunks and scattered across the surface. The casserole baked at 375 degrees for 45 minutes. The bread soaked up liquid and turned crispy on top while staying soft underneath. The tomato soup thinned out and mixed with the vegetable water to create a sauce that wasn't quite soup and wasn't quite gravy. Leftover vegetable casserole tasted like whatever vegetables went into it, sometimes sweet from carrots, sometimes earthy from green beans, always slightly tomatoey from the soup on top. The bread added bulk and made it filling enough to be a main dish instead of a side. Nothing got wasted. Vegetables that would have been thrown away became dinner. Cooking water that would have gone down the drain became sauce. After the Depression ended, people stopped saving vegetable water entirely. The name came from the joke that every Midwestern potluck was legally required to have this exact casserole: ground beef, tater tots, vegetables, and cheese baked together in a dish, so common it didn't even need a real name. Ground beef browned with chopped onions until the meat was cooked through and the onions were soft. Frozen mixed vegetables: corn, peas, carrots, green beans went straight from the freezer into the casserole dish without thawing. The cooked beef and onions spread over the vegetables. Cream of mushroom soup mixed with a little milk poured over everything, creating a sauce that would hold the casserole together. Frozen tater tots arranged in neat rows covered the entire top. Shredded cheddar cheese went over the tater tots. The casserole baked at 375 degrees for 45 minutes until the tater tots turned golden and crispy and the cheese melted and browned in spots. Mandatory Midwest casserole tasted exactly like Comfort salty, cheesy, with the tater tots providing crunch and the vegetables adding color, but not much flavor. Every bite was the same: beef, vegetable, creamy sauce, crispy potato, melted cheese. Families made it weekly because all the ingredients came from the freezer or pantry. Nothing required planning or fresh shopping. By the 2000s, it started disappearing as people wanted meals that felt less processed. 3 kinds of canned cream soup mixed together might sound excessive, but in the 1960s, it was the secret to making chicken and rice casseroles taste rich without using actual cream or homemade stock. Raw chicken pieces, thighs, breasts, drumsticks, whatever was cheapest, went into the bottom of a deep casserole dish. Instant rice poured over the chicken without cooking it first. 3 cans of soup: cream of chicken, cream of mushroom, and cream of celery got mixed together in a bowl with water, milk, onion powder, and garlic powder until smooth. The soup mixture poured over the rice and chicken, covering everything completely. The casserole got sealed tight with aluminum foil and baked at 350 degrees for 90 minutes. The foil trapped steam, which cooked the rice and kept the chicken moist. When it came out, the rice had absorbed all the liquid and the chicken was falling off the bone. Old-school chicken and rice casserole tasted creamy and savory, with the 3 soups creating a flavor that was more complex than any one soup alone. The rice was soft and thick, almost sticky from the condensed soup. Families made it because it required no skill and used cheap ingredients. By the 2000s, people wanted recipes without canned soup, and this one disappeared. Church ladies in the 1950s refused to use canned cream of mushroom soup in their tuna casseroles, insisting that a homemade white sauce tasted better and didn't leave that metallic tang on your tongue after eating. Butter melted in a saucepan, then flour got whisked in and cooked for a minute until it smelled nutty. Milk poured in slowly while whisking constantly until the sauce thickened into a smooth, creamy base. Salt, pepper, and a pinch of nutmeg went in. Cooked rice, drained canned tuna, and frozen peas stirred into the sauce until everything was coated. The mixture went into a buttered casserole dish and got topped with crushed saltine crackers mixed with melted butter. The casserole baked at 350 degrees for 30 minutes until the cracker topping turned golden brown and the edges bubbled. Church basement tuna rice casserole tasted clean and simple. The homemade sauce let the tuna flavor come through instead of covering it up with condensed soup. The rice made it more filling than noodle-based tuna casseroles, and the cracker topping added salt and crunch. Canned tuna cost 35 cents. Rice was cheap. The casserole fed 12 people for under $2. After the 1970s, homemade white sauce felt too labor-intensive, and this version faded away as canned soup took over. 10 down, 20 to go. The next 10 include wild rice cooked with chicken the Minnesota way, beef topped with drop biscuits, a casserole so cheap they called it poor man's husband, cabbage baked under crushed crackers, and a dish named after John Wayne that has nothing to do with westerns. Minnesota claimed wild rice as its state grain in 1977, and by then, home cooks had been baking it into hot dishes with chicken for decades, a regional specialty that never traveled beyond the upper Midwest. Wild rice took longer to cook than regular rice, so it got boiled first in salted water until the grains split open and turned tender. After draining, the rice went into a casserole dish with cubed cooked chicken, usually leftovers from a Sunday roast or a store-bought rotisserie bird cut into chunks. Sliced mushrooms went in, either fresh or canned depending on what was available. Cream of mushroom soup mixed with chicken broth created the sauce that held everything together. Slivered almonds scattered across the top added crunch. The casserole baked covered at 350 degrees for 40 minutes, then uncovered for 10 more minutes to let the almonds toast and the top turn golden. Wild rice and chicken hot dish tasted earthy and nutty from the rice itself, with the mushrooms adding a deeper, almost meaty flavor that made the dish feel more substantial than it actually was. The almonds provided textural contrast against the soft rice and tender chicken. The sauce was rich but not heavy, just enough to coat everything without turning the dish soupy. Wild rice cost more than white rice, but it was still cheaper than beef. A pound of wild rice could stretch across 2 casseroles and feed 12 people total. Families in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and North Dakota made it regularly. But outside that region, almost nobody knew it existed. After the 1990s, even in the Midwest, it started fading as people moved away from hot dishes entirely. In a bowl was fine, but beef stew with biscuits baked right on top turned it into a casserole that felt more complete, a one-dish meal that didn't require bread on the side. Ground beef or stew meat browned in a skillet with chopped onions until the meat was cooked through. If using stew meat, it had to simmer in beef broth for about an hour first to make it tender enough to eat. Canned or frozen mixed vegetables went into the meat along with a can of tomato soup and enough water to make it saucy but not soupy. The mixture went into a casserole dish. Drop biscuits made from Bisquick or homemade biscuit dough got spooned on top of the beef mixture in dollops that didn't quite touch each other, leaving gaps where the sauce could bubble up. Casserole baked uncovered at 400 degrees for 25 minutes until the biscuits turned golden brown and cooked through. Beef and biscuit casserole tasted like pot pie without the bottom crust savory beef and vegetables with fluffy, slightly crispy biscuits on top that soaked up the sauce from underneath. The biscuits on the edges got crispier, while the ones in the middle stayed softer and more bread-like. Families made this when they wanted something that felt hearty and filling without requiring multiple pots or complicated steps. Everything cooked in one dish. Ground beef was cheaper than stew meat, but worked just as well. A box of Bisquick lasted for weeks and made the biscuits foolproof. By the 2000s, frozen pot pies became easier than making this from scratch, and the casserole disappeared. The name suggested desperation, a casserole so cheap that even a poor man's husband could afford to make it, and the ingredients proved the name wasn't exaggerating. Ground beef browned with diced onions and minced garlic until the meat was cooked through and the kitchen smelled like something was actually happening. Salt and pepper went in. A can of diced tomatoes with the liquid got stirred into the meat. Cooked elbow macaroni, just plain boiled pasta, nothing fancy mixed with the beef and tomatoes until combined. The whole thing went into a casserole dish. Cottage cheese got spooned over the top in dollops that spread slightly but didn't cover everything completely. Shredded cheddar cheese went over the cottage cheese, covering it entirely. The casserole baked at 350 degrees for 30 minutes until the cheddar melted and started browning around the edges. Poor man's husband casserole tasted like a budget version of lasagna tomato. Beef, cheese, pasta, but without the structure or the ricotta. The cottage cheese added creaminess and tang that cut through the heaviness of the ground beef. The cheddar on top provided salt and that stretchy, melted cheese pull that made people go back for seconds. A pound of ground beef, a box of pasta, and the cheapest cottage cheese at the store cost less than $3 total in the 1970s and fed a family of 6. The name might have been a joke, but the casserole worked. It filled stomachs, used ingredients everyone already had, and tasted good enough that nobody complained. After the 1990s, it vanished completely, and the name was forgotten along with the recipe. This is number 14 from the intro: cabbage used in a way that defies logic. Baked under cheese and crackers until it turns into something people actually wanted to eat. Cabbage got chopped into rough chunks and boiled in salted water until it was tender but not mushy. After draining really well, because wet cabbage would make the casserole soupy, it went into a buttered casserole dish. A simple cheese sauce made from butter, flour, milk, and shredded cheddar got poured over the cabbage, coating every piece. More shredded cheddar went on top of the sauce. Saltine crackers got crushed into coarse crumbs and mixed with melted butter until every crumb was coated. The buttery cracker crumbs scattered across the top of the casserole in an even layer. The dish baked at 350 degrees for 30 minutes until the cheese melted and the cracker topping turned golden brown and crispy. Cheesy cabbage casserole tasted like comfort food that happened to contain a vegetable. The cabbage lost most of its bitter edge during boiling and became sweet and mild under all that cheese. The sauce was rich and creamy, and the cracker topping provided a salty, crunchy contrast to the soft cabbage underneath. A head of cabbage cost 25 cents in the 1950s. Crackers were cheap. Cheese was the most expensive part, but even that was less than $1. The casserole fed 8 people and used a vegetable that lasted for weeks in the icebox without spoiling. After the 1980s, people stopped making it because cabbage felt too Depression-era, too poor, even when it was covered in cheese and crackers. A. 10-year-old girl wanted to publish a cookbook in the 1970s to raise money for cancer research, so she wrote to nearly 1,500 celebrities asking for recipes, and John Wayne actually sent one back. The original recipe Wayne submitted was simpler than what became popular later. Ground beef browned with taco seasoning went into the bottom of a casserole dish. A layer of sour cream and mayonnaise mixed together spread over the beef. Diced tomatoes and chopped green chiles went on top of the sour cream. Shredded cheddar cheese covered everything. Later versions added a biscuit dough crust on the bottom, refrigerated canned biscuits, pressed flat, and fitted together to line the dish before adding the other ingredients. Some versions added jalapenos, some added onions and bell peppers, but the core stayed the same: beef, creamy layer, tomatoes, cheese. The casserole baked at 350 degrees for 35 minutes until the cheese melted and started browning, and the biscuit crust, if using one, cooked through and turned golden on the edges. John Wayne casserole tasted like a deconstructed taco, with extra richness from the sour cream and mayo layer. The combination of sour cream and mayonnaise sounds wrong, but creates a tangy, creamy base that balances the spiced beef and the acidity of the tomatoes. The cheese on top adds salt and that satisfying stretch. The casserole became popular at church potlucks and family gatherings throughout the 1980s because it was easy, fed a crowd, and had a celebrity name attached. By the 2000s, John Wayne's fame had faded with younger generations, and the casserole faded with it. 15 down, halfway there. The next 5 include Tex-Mex chicken that defined the Southwest, corn baked with Jiffy Mix, chicken sealed under foil that nobody dared peek at, deconstructed stuffed peppers in casserole form, and meatballs with rice cooked inside that look like porcupines. Keep going. King Ranch casserole claimed to come from the famous Texas ranch, but nobody at the actual King Ranch ever confirmed created it. More likely, someone just slapped the name on their Tex-Mex chicken casserole and it stuck. Cooked chicken got shredded or cut into chunks. Tortillas, corn, or flour, whichever was cheaper, got torn into pieces. The casserole built in layers: torn tortillas on the bottom, shredded chicken on top, then a mixture of cream of chicken soup, cream of mushroom soup, and a can of Rotel tomatoes with green chiles poured over everything. Shredded cheddar cheese went on top. The layers repeated: more tortillas, more chicken, more soup mixture, more cheese, until the dish was full. The casserole baked covered at 350 degrees for 30 minutes, then uncovered for 15 more minutes to let the cheese on top brown and bubble. King Ranch casserole tasted like Tex-Mex comfort food, creamy, cheesy, with a slight kick from the Rotel tomatoes. The tortillas softened and absorbed the soup mixture, turning almost pasta-like in texture. The chicken stayed tender and flavorful, coated in the creamy sauce. It became a potluck staple across Texas and the Southwest in the 1950s and 60s because it used ingredients everyone had access to, and it fed a crowd cheaply. Canned soup was convenient. Rotel added flavor without requiring fresh peppers. Tortillas were cheaper than pasta. By the 2010s, people started wanting fresher, less processed versions, and the original canned soup casserole started disappearing from tables. Jiffy corn muffin mix hit store shelves in the 1950s, and within a decade, the company had published a corn casserole recipe that became so ubiquitous at holiday dinners that people forgot it came from a box. A box of Jiffy corn muffin mix went into a bowl with a can of creamed corn, a can of whole kernel corn drained, sour cream, melted butter, and 2 eggs. Everything stirred together until just combined overmixing would make it tough. The batter poured into a greased casserole dish and baked at 350 degrees for 45 minutes, until the top turned golden brown and a toothpick inserted in the center came out clean. Corn casserole came out dense and moist, somewhere between cornbread and pudding. The texture was soft and slightly custardy from the creamed corn and sour cream, with whole corn kernels providing occasional pops of sweetness. The top formed a light crust, while the inside stayed tender and almost spoonable. It tasted sweet and buttery, more like a side dish than a bread, and it paired well with turkey, ham, or any roasted meat. Families served it at Thanksgiving and Christmas alongside green beans and mashed potatoes. A box of Jiffy cost less than 50 cents. 2 cans of corn cost less than $1 combined. The entire casserole cost under $3 and fed 8 to 10 people. That's why it showed up at every holiday dinner for decades. The name was a warning. Once this casserole went into the oven covered with foil, you weren't allowed to lift the foil and check on it, or the whole thing would fail. Raw chicken pieces, whatever was on sale, usually thighs and drumsticks, went into the bottom of a deep casserole dish. Uncooked white rice poured over the chicken. A can of cream of mushroom soup mixed with water and dry onion soup mix got whisked together until smooth, then poured over the rice and chicken. The liquid had to cover the rice completely, or it wouldn't cook properly. Aluminum foil sealed the dish tightly, crimped around the edges to trap all the steam inside. The casserole went into a 350-degree oven for exactly 90 minutes. No peeking. No checking. The foil stayed on the entire time. The trapped steam cooked the rice and kept the chicken moist while everything baked together. When it came out, the rice had absorbed all the liquid and the chicken was falling off the bone tender. The soup had turned into a thick, creamy sauce that coated both the rice and the chicken. No-peak chicken casserole tasted like a complete meal, savory from the onion soup mix, creamy from the mushroom soup, with tender chicken and perfectly cooked rice in every bite. It worked because busy cooks could throw it together in 5 minutes and forget about it until dinner time. By the 2000s, people wanted recipes where they could check on the food, and the no-peak rule felt too restrictive. The casserole faded away. Traditional stuffed peppers took too long to make hollowing out peppers, stuffing them individually, arranging them in a dish so they didn't tip over, so someone in the 1970s deconstructed the whole thing into a casserole that tasted the same but took half the time. Bell peppers got chopped into chunks instead of left whole. Ground beef browned with diced onions until cooked through. The chopped peppers went into the beef mixture and cooked until they started softening. Cooked rice stirred in along with a can of tomato sauce, salt, pepper, and a little sugar to balance the acidity. Everything went into a casserole dish. Tomato sauce poured over the top, covering the rice and beef mixture. Shredded mozzarella cheese went over the sauce. The casserole baked uncovered at 350 degrees for 30 minutes until the cheese melted and started browning in spots. Stuffed bell pepper casserole tasted exactly like stuffed peppers, sweet peppers, savory beef, tomato sauce, melted cheese, but without the fussy presentation. The peppers were tender but not mushy, and they flavored the rice and beef as everything baked together. By the 2010s, meal prep culture brought stuffed peppers back into fashion, and the casserole version got forgotten in favor of the prettier, Instagram-friendly whole peppers. This is number 20 from the intro meatballs with uncooked rice mixed into the meat so that as they bake, the rice grains push through the surface and stick out like porcupine quills. Ground beef mixed with uncooked white rice, a beaten egg, chopped onion, salt, and pepper. The ratio was about 2 parts meat to 1 part rice. Hands shaped the mixture into meatballs about the size of golf balls. Each meatball got placed in a casserole dish in a single layer, close together, but not touching. A mixture of tomato sauce, water, and a little sugar got poured over the meatballs until they were about halfway covered. The casserole baked, covered at 350 degrees for about an hour. As it cooked, the rice inside the meatballs absorbed liquid and expanded, pushing individual grains through the surface of the meat. By the time it was done, each meatball looked spiky, with white rice grains sticking out at odd angles. Porcupine meatballs casserole tasted like meatballs in tomato sauce, but the rice inside made them lighter and less dense than regular meatballs. The rice also stretched the meat significantly. 1 pound of ground beef made enough meatballs to feed 6 people when you added rice. Kids liked them because they looked interesting. 20 down, 10 to go. The final 10 include Midwest hamburger rice, chicken with frozen hash browns, chow mein noodles straight from the can, beef topped with refrigerator biscuits, a church supper staple from the 1960s, funeral potatoes that fed mourners, beef in sour cream sauce, and more. Almost there. Hamburger rice hot dish was Minnesota's answer to feeding a family of 8 on $3 ground beef, rice, and whatever vegetables were cheap that week, all baked together in one pan that required almost no skill to pull off. Ground beef browned in a skillet with chopped onions until the meat was cooked through, and the onions were soft and translucent. Salt and pepper went in. The beef and onions went into the bottom of a casserole dish. Uncooked white rice scattered over the beef in an even layer. Canned or frozen mixed vegetables, corn, peas, carrots, green beans went on top of the rice. A can of tomato soup mixed with 2 cans of water got poured over everything, making sure the liquid covered the rice completely or it wouldn't cook properly. The casserole got covered tightly with aluminum foil and baked at 350 degrees for an hour and 15 minutes. The foil trapped steam, which cooked the rice and kept everything moist. When it came out, the rice had absorbed all the liquid and turned tender, the vegetables were cooked through, and the whole thing had melded together into a cohesive meal. Hamburger rice hot dish tasted like a complete dinner in one bite, savory from the beef, slightly sweet from the tomato soup, with vegetables adding color and texture. The rice soaked up all the flavors and turned into the backbone of the dish, making it filling and substantial. It was a Monday night staple in Midwestern homes because you could make it with ingredients that kept for weeks in the pantry and freezer. Hamburger rice hot dish showed up at church basement dinners, potlucks, and family gatherings throughout Minnesota, Wisconsin, and the Dakotas. It was reliable, predictable, and nobody ever complained about it, even though nobody got particularly excited about it either. By the 2000s, it started disappearing as younger generations moved away from hot dishes and wanted meals that felt less institutional, less cafeteria-like, less like something their grandmothers made. Frozen hash browns transformed casseroles in the 1970s by providing a starchy, filling base that required zero peeling, chopping, or boiling. Just open the bag and dump them in. A large bag of frozen, shredded hash browns, the kind that came in a solid block, not the loose kind, went straight from the freezer into a casserole dish without thawing. Cooked chicken cut into bite-sized pieces scattered over the hash browns. A mixture of cream of chicken soup, sour cream, melted butter, and shredded cheddar cheese got stirred together until smooth, then poured over the chicken and hash browns. More shredded cheddar went on top. Crushed cornflakes mixed with melted butter created a crunchy topping that scattered across the cheese layer. The casserole baked uncovered at 350 degrees for an hour until the hash browns were cooked through. The cheese melted and bubbled, and the cornflake topping turned golden brown and crispy. The chicken throughout provided protein and substance, and the cornflake topping added a sweet, crunchy contrast to the savory casserole underneath. It tasted rich and indulgent, despite being made almost entirely from convenience foods. Chicken hash brown casserole became a potluck MVP because it transported well, stayed hot for hours, and pleased almost everyone who tried it. Kids ate it, without complaint. Adults went back for seconds. A bag of frozen hash browns cost $2. A can of soup was less than $1. The entire casserole cost about $6 and fed 10 to 12 people. It stayed popular longer than most casseroles on this list, lasting well into the 2010s before finally starting to fade as people became more aware of processed foods and wanted meals made from fresh ingredients instead of cans and frozen bags. But at church potlucks and funeral dinners in small Midwestern towns, you can still find it occasionally. Canned chow mein noodles were never meant to be a casserole base, but in the 1960s, home cooks discovered that the crunchy noodles could add texture to ground beef casseroles while making the dish feel vaguely exotic and Asian-inspired. Ground beef browned with chopped onions and celery until everything was cooked through and the vegetables were soft. A can of cream of mushroom soup went in along with a can of cream of chicken soup. Two soups together made it richer than one alone. A small can of sliced water chestnuts added crunch. Soy sauce provided color and saltiness. Everything mixed together into a thick, saucy mixture. Half of the beef mixture went into a casserole dish. A full can of chow mein noodles, those crispy, thin noodles that came in a can and were supposed to be eaten as a snack scattered over the beef. The rest of the beef mixture went on top of the noodles. More chow mein noodles covered the top layer. The casserole baked uncovered at 350 degrees for 30 minutes. Chow mein noodle casserole came out with an interesting texture. The noodles on top stayed crispy and crunchy, while the ones in the middle softened slightly from the moisture in the beef mixture but didn't get completely soggy. The water chestnuts added little pops of fresh crunch that contrasted with the soft ground beef. It tasted like American Chinese food filtered through a Midwestern church basement kitchen. The soy sauce gave it a salty, slightly Asian flavor, but the cream soups made it creamy and mild. The chow mein noodles added a unique texture that made the casserole memorable, even if the flavor was fairly standard. Families made it because it felt different from the usual casseroles without actually requiring different skills or ingredients. Everything came from cans. The chow mein noodles were shelf-stable and lasted forever in the cupboard. A pound of ground beef and several cans cost less than $4 total and fed 6 to 8 people. By the 1990s, when people started having access to real Chinese takeout, chow mein noodle casserole felt embarrassingly inauthentic. The casserole disappeared quietly, and most people forgot it ever existed. Refrigerated canned biscuits changed home cooking in the 1950s by giving people a shortcut to homemade bread. And casserole recipes immediately started using them as easy toppings that baked right on top of the filling. Ground beef browned with diced onions until cooked through. A can of cream of mushroom soup went in along with frozen mixed vegetables, corn, peas, carrots, green beans. The mixture stirred together until combined and heated through, then went into a casserole dish. The filling needed to be hot before the biscuits went on top, or they wouldn't cook properly on the bottom. A tube of refrigerated biscuit dough got opened, the kind that popped when you peeled the paper label off, and each biscuit got placed on top of the hot beef mixture. The biscuits didn't need to touch each other or cover every inch of the filling. Gaps were fine. The casserole went into a 375-degree oven and baked for 25 to 30 minutes until the biscuits turned golden brown on top and cooked through on the bottom. Biscuit-topped ground beef casserole tasted like pot pie, but easier and less fussy. The biscuits on top were fluffy and bread-like, with bottoms that had absorbed some of the gravy from the beef mixture and turned soft and flavorful. The filling underneath was creamy and savory, with the frozen vegetables adding pops of color and slight sweetness. It was a weeknight dinner staple because it came together in less than an hour from start to finish. Ground beef was cheap and quick to cook. A can of soup provided instant gravy. Frozen vegetables required no prep. Refrigerated biscuits meant no mixing or rolling dough. Every component was convenience-based, designed to get dinner on the table fast. Families made it weekly throughout the 1970s and 80s because kids ate it without complaining, and parents could make it while tired after work. A pound of ground beef, a can of soup, frozen vegetables, and biscuits cost less than $5 total and fed a family of 6. By the 2000s, people wanted homemade biscuits, or at least something that didn't come from a pressurized tube. The casserole faded away as refrigerated dough started feeling too processed and artificial. Church supper hot dish had no official name because every congregation made a slightly different version, but the base was always the same ground beef, cream of mushroom soup, and whatever else was cheap that week. Ground beef browned with chopped onions until the meat was cooked through. A can of cream of mushroom soup went in without diluting it with milk or water, just straight from the can, thick and concentrated. Cooked macaroni or egg noodles stirred into the beef and soup mixture. Some churches added a can of green beans. Some added corn. Some added both. Some added neither. The mixture went into a casserole dish. Shredded cheddar cheese covered the top completely, edge to edge. The casserole baked at 350 degrees for 30 minutes until the cheese melted and started browning around the edges where it touched the sides of the dish. Church supper hot dish came out simple and straightforward, no fancy seasonings. No complicated techniques, just beef, noodles, soup, and cheese baked together until everything melded into one cohesive mass. The soup created a creamy sauce that coated the noodles and beef. The cheese on top added richness and salt. It tasted like comfort food designed by committee, mild enough that nobody would complain, filling enough that people would feel satisfied. Cheese was the most expensive ingredient, but even that was affordable when bought in bulk. The recipe never got written down officially because everyone just knew how to make it. You showed up at church, watched someone else make it once, and then you knew. By the 2000s, church suppers became less common, 25 down, 5 to go. The final stretch includes hash browns with cheese that fed mourners at funerals, beef in sour cream sauce over noodles, a southwestern tamale pie with cornmeal crust, chicken under crushed Ritz crackers, and salmon in cream sauce served on toast. Funeral potatoes got their name from showing up at every Mormon funeral luncheon in Utah, Idaho, and parts of Nevada, a hash brown casserole so reliable and comforting that it became synonymous with feeding mourners after services. Frozen shredded hash browns thawed slightly, just enough to break them apart. A mixture of cream of chicken soup, sour cream, melted butter, and shredded cheddar cheese stirred together until smooth, then mixed with the hash browns until every shred was coated. Diced onions went in for flavor. The mixture went into a buttered casserole dish. Crushed cornflakes mixed with melted butter created the signature topping, golden, crunchy, slightly sweet flakes. The dish baked uncovered at 350 degrees for 45 minutes, until the hash browns were cooked through. The cheese melted and bubbled, and the cornflake topping turned deep golden brown. Funeral potatoes came out rich and creamy, but the name stuck because they were always there when someone died, feeding grieving families and congregation members who gathered after services. One casserole fed 12 to 15 people, which mattered when you were feeding an entire chapel full of mourners. The dish stayed popular longer than most casseroles on this list, lasting well into the 2020s in Utah and surrounding areas. Outside of Mormon communities, though, most people had never heard of funeral potatoes. The name alone kept it regional. Calling something funeral potatoes anywhere else felt morbid instead of comforting. Sour cream beef noodle casserole was the 1950s version of beef stroganoff, ground beef in a creamy sauce over noodles, but baked in a casserole dish instead of served from a skillet, and using sour cream as the base instead of the traditional sour cream and mustard combination. Ground beef browned with chopped onions and minced garlic until the meat was cooked through and the kitchen smelled savory and rich. Salt and pepper went in. A can of tomato sauce stirred into the beef, along with a tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce for depth. The mixture simmered for a few minutes to let the flavors blend. Egg noodles cooked in boiling salted water until just tender, then drained. Sour cream and cottage cheese mixed together in a bowl. The cottage cheese added creaminess and stretched the more expensive sour cream further. Chopped green onions stirred into the sour cream mixture. Casserole assembled in layers. Half the cooked noodles went into the bottom of a buttered casserole dish. All of the sour cream mixture spread over the noodles. The beef and tomato mixture went on top of the sour cream. The rest of the noodles covered the beef. Shredded cheddar cheese scattered across the top. The casserole baked at 350 degrees for 30 minutes until heated through and the cheese melted. Sour cream beef noodle casserole came out with distinct layers visible when you cut into it. Noodles, white cream layer, red beef layer, more noodles, melted cheese on top. Each bite had all the components together. The sour cream layer added tanginess and richness that balanced the tomato-heavy beef. The cottage cheese made the cream layer thicker and more substantial. The noodles soaked up flavors from both the beef and the cream. It tasted like a fancy dinner, despite being made from cheap ingredients. Ground beef cost less than $1 per pound. Egg noodles were cheap. Sour cream and cottage cheese together cost less than buying enough sour cream alone. A can of tomato sauce was pennies. The entire casserole cost about $3 and fed 8 people. By the 1990s, it had mostly disappeared as people wanted actual beef stroganoff made properly instead of a casserole approximation. Tamale pie wasn't Mexican food, it was Southwestern American food, invented by people who wanted something that tasted vaguely like tamales, but required none of the skill or time needed to actually make tamales. Ground beef browned with diced onions until cooked through. A can of tomato sauce went in, along with a can of corn kernels with the liquid, chili powder, cumin, salt, and pepper. The mixture simmered for 10 minutes to let the spices bloom and the flavors meld together. Sliced black olives stirred in at the end, optional, but common in older recipes. The beef mixture went into a casserole dish and spread into an even layer. Cornmeal mixed with water, a beaten egg, and a little salt created a batter that poured over the beef mixture, covering it completely. As it baked, the cornmeal would cook into a cornbread-like topping. The casserole baked at 375 degrees for 35 to 40 minutes until the cornmeal topping turned golden brown and firm enough to cut. Some recipes added shredded cheese on top during the last 10 minutes of baking. Some kept it plain. Chile tamale pie casserole came out with 2 distinct layers: spiced beef on the bottom, cornbread on top. The cornbread absorbed some of the liquid from the beef, making the bottom softer and more flavorful, while the top stayed crusty and bread-like. Beef mixture was savory and slightly spicy, with the corn adding sweetness and the olives adding salt and brininess. Ritz crackers as a casserole topping became so common in the 1980s that entire cookbooks got published just for recipes using the buttery crackers, and this chicken casserole was one of the most popular. Cooked chicken cut into bite-sized pieces went into the bottom of a casserole dish, a mixture of cream of chicken soup, sour cream, and a little milk stirred together until smooth, then poured over the chicken. Frozen mixed vegetables, peas, carrots, corn scattered over the soup mixture. Still frozen, no need to thaw them first. Ritz crackers got crushed into coarse crumbs, not pulverized into dust, but broken into pieces that still had some texture. Melted butter mixed with the cracker crumbs until every piece was coated and glistening. The buttery cracker crumbs scattered across the top of the casserole in a thick, even layer that covered everything underneath. The casserole baked uncovered at 350 degrees for 35 minutes until the vegetables were cooked through. The soup mixture was bubbling at the edges, and the Ritz cracker topping turned deep golden brown and crispy. Ritz cracker chicken casserole came out looking impressive despite being incredibly simple. The cracker topping was the star, buttery, salty, crunchy, with that distinctive Ritz flavor that everyone recognized immediately. Underneath, the chicken and vegetables sat in a creamy sauce that was rich but not heavy, savory but not overly seasoned. It tasted like comfort food designed for people who didn't want to think too hard about dinner. The Ritz crackers did most of the heavy lifting flavor-wise, providing salt, butter, and crunch. The chicken was mild and tender. The vegetables added color and nutrition. The cream soup held everything together. Families made it weekly throughout the 1980s and into the 1990s because kids ate it without complaint. It looked fancy enough to serve to guests, and it came together in 15 minutes of active work. A box of Ritz crackers cost $2. A can of cream soup was less than $1. Chicken was the most expensive part, but even that was affordable. By the 2010s, people started wanting meals that didn't rely on canned soup and processed crackers. Ritz cracker chicken casserole faded away as fresher, less processed cooking became the standard. Salmon wiggle wasn't originally a casserole, it was creamed salmon served on toast, a quick Depression-era meal that used canned salmon and white sauce. But by the 1950s, someone had turned it into a baked casserole that was slightly more substantial and could feed more people. A can of salmon got opened and drained, then picked through to remove any bones or skin, though the soft bones were edible and full of calcium, so some people left them in. The salmon flaked apart with a fork into small pieces. Frozen peas, still frozen, straight from the bag, went into a casserole dish along with the flaked salmon. White sauce got made from scratch on the stove, butter melted, flour whisked in and cooked for a minute, then milk added slowly while whisking constantly until the sauce thickened and turned smooth and creamy. Salt, pepper, and a pinch of nutmeg went into the sauce. The hot white sauce poured over the salmon and peas, mixing slightly as it settled into the dish. Crushed saltine crackers mixed with melted butter created a simple topping that scattered across the surface. The casserole baked at 350 degrees for 25 minutes until the edges bubbled, the peas were cooked through, and the cracker topping turned golden brown. Salmon wiggle casserole came out creamy and mild, with the white sauce coating both the salmon and the peas in smooth richness. The salmon flavor was present, but not overwhelming. Canned salmon was milder than fresh. The peas added little pops of sweetness and color. Cracker topping provided salt and crunch. It tasted like comfort food from another era, simple, economical, nourishing but not exciting. The name wiggle supposedly came from the way the creamy mixture moved when you spooned it onto toast, though in casserole form it stayed more stationary. Canned salmon cost about 50 cents in the 1950s. A bag of frozen peas cost less than that. The casserole fed 6 people for under $2 total, which made it valuable for families stretching tight grocery budgets. By the 1970s, salmon wiggle had mostly disappeared as canned salmon became less popular and people wanted fresher, less Depression-era meals. Casserole version lasted slightly longer, but eventually faded away along with the original. 30 casseroles, 50 years. all of them baked in glass dishes and served at potlucks, church suppers, and family dinners, then quietly forgotten as younger generations stopped learning the recipes. Most disappeared not because they tasted bad, but because they reminded people of tight budgets, canned soup, and convenience foods from an era we'd rather forget. These weren't gourmet meals. They were survival disguised as comfort food, and they worked. If this brought back memories or taught you something your grandmother never told you, smash that like button and subscribe. History like this deserves to be remembered even when it comes from a can.